So today I would like to talk about the role that oxygen plays in how we feel and whether we procrastinate or not, for example. A lot of people have breathing habits that don't allow them to fully oxygenate their body. For example, they breathe through their mouth and they do those shallow chest breaths in opposite to deeper stomach kind of breaths, which would help them to breathe naturally and relax and actually oxygenate their blood and their body. So there are many different techniques that we can use to improve the level of oxygenation of the body. There are some breathing techniques from like Wim Hof, from a book called The Oxygen Advantage, or some yogi practices with prana and so on. And then just maybe also going for a run in the morning or exercising outside can help to oxygenate us more. And there can be a noticeable difference, including a state of euphoria, including a lot of energy, clarity of thinking can improve if we take those steps. And a lot of people have issues, breathing properly or getting full oxygen or even are low on iron. And that is the hidden cause of why they cannot succeed. Because whenever they have amazing ideas or plans, they just don't have enough energy. They're just always, tomorrow I will feel better. And this might be the solution, especially if someone has bad habits and is breathing through their mouth and shallowly, and it's keeping himself in the state of fight or flight, which is associated with short, shallow breaths with your chest. And then learning the proper breathing technique can be a game changer. It can be a game changer in energy levels, in lifting up depression. So what do you think about this?
Okay, so so what I understood is that the level of oxygen causes a lot of things. Let's say low oxygen means a lot of negative things, like, for example, feeling less happy or being less productive. And that there are different ways that we can influence the level of oxygen that we're getting to our brain. And that does seem to make a lot of sense. First of all, what I'm thinking is that just like the muscles that are working to work, they need to have oxygen. Our brain, for anything it does, needs oxygen. So for any mental work, there needs to be energy, and this energy is produced with the help of oxygen. So no oxygen, no possibility to do any mental work. So less oxygen would obviously lead to less productive mental work. And of course, as the brain also is responsible for the way we feel, could also influence the way that we feel. Of course, it's also true that, for example, certain sexual pleasures can be heightened by lack of oxygen, which is sometimes why people try to artificially get less oxygen to get more sexual pleasure. But I would say that generally, more oxygen means better feelings, and more oxygen means being more productive, and maybe not procrastinating, as you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would like to see what's the list of things that more oxygen can do for us, and what are the things that we can do to get more oxygen.
Mm-hmm. There's this very interesting example from Wim Hof, where he has you take 30 deep breaths, and he has the system of like belly, chest, head. So you take as much as you can in the belly, in the chest, in the head, and then you kind of relax, let it go, and then you do that 30 times. And then you stop breathing and you start doing push-ups. And what happens is that people are able to do mostly like twice the amount of push-ups that they are normally capable of, because the oxygen is already in your body and it's very like readily available for the muscles. So that's one of the interesting experiments that everyone can run within a few minutes to see how more oxygen could make them stronger and physically stronger.
Okay. So there's an exercise by a guy called Wim Hof that makes it possible for us to to be able to be more powerful, to have more power, to do more push-ups by having certain kinds of breathing before. Okay, so this is an experiment that anybody can do. I mean, maybe you don't need, I mean, if you sometimes have a push-up competition, then this is helpful for you. I've been doing something similar when I had running competitions. I thought, well, when I'm running, let's say 1 kilometer race, I'm at the end of the race, I'm in a lack of oxygen. So how about I try to push into my system a lot of oxygen before, so then might have an advantage during the race. What is the technique that Wim Hof is suggesting again in order to get more oxygen?
So it's taking those deep breaths, like feeling your stomach, and then your chest, and then somewhat your head, like you feel like you breathe even more, it goes up to your head, and doing that 30 times, and not basically like you inhale, but you don't exhale so much, you just like let it go like this, and you inhale more. So you just like add more without like pushing it out too much. And
okay, so 30 times. So, okay, so could you give an example? I mean, if I give an example, it would be something like, well, I actually don't know. Maybe you give an example. How would it sound? How would it look like?
It's just deep breathing, like with all you've got. Like you inhale as much as you can, and then you let go. Inhale and let go. And he's able to control different systems in his body, including his immune system. So if you investigate his story a bit more, there is research where they were injecting him with some disease, and this is like a disease that would be guaranteed to make you sick if it's ingested. But he was able to take control over his immune response and control his fight or flight. And he uses special breathing before going to cold. So his cold exposure is also possible because the way that he's using his breathing. And you mentioned the sexual thing with limiting the breath. And there is also the opposite of that, which is hyperoxygenation in Tantra, for example. So you have breathing exercises that you do with your partner in Tantra so that you hyperoxygenate your brain. You enter a state of a little bit of like on the high, and the reality disappears, and it's just like this moment right here, right now, because you're not able to maybe control too many details at the time, and you feel everything that you feel more because you are in that state. So we can really access a wide variety of states, mental states, from strength to, you know, being almost like on high, using our breath. It's really profound. And yogis were also noticing that, and how many times per minute you breathe matters for how calm you are. So if you want to calm yourself down, you take those slow belly kind of breaths, and that gets you out of fight or flight.
Okay, all right. So, so far, I'd like to summarize that there are certain ways that we can increase the amount of oxygen that's available to us, and there are certain kinds of effects. And the positive effects that you mentioned are that you have more power, physical power, for example, to do push-ups, that mentally we can be more productive, more powerful, that we might have a positive experience, like, for example, you were saying hyperoxygenation for having an more sexual experience in Tantra. And then you were saying that this guy, Wim Hof, was using it to have a better immune system response and to be able to deal with the cold temperature. So are there any other benefits of heightened oxygen? And then what are the ways, besides this technique, to get more oxygen?
Okay, so interesting thing is that some people who developed not optimal breathing patterns usually end up with anxiety, with depression, because of lack of oxygen, chronic lack of oxygen. So it's therapeutical for them. For example, exercise is known to lesser your depression or to make you not depressed anymore, because it makes you breathe a lot and properly. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to keep up with the pace of the exercise. So one of the ways that everyone can use it on a daily basis is to either exercise in the morning or to go for a run in nature. That would be optimal. So between 12 and 30 minutes per day of running is the minimal optimal dose of running. If you
Between
run
what? How much?
12
Sorry.
and 30 minutes.
Okay.
Because if you run a little bit less, then you're not using the full potential of running. But if you run more than 30 minutes, then you start, getting some maybe worse outcomes.
Hmm. Do you think it
So
has to be running, or can it also be 12 minutes of push-ups?
I think it could be as well. Like
Okay.
it's about getting yourself to breathe, and
Hmm.
it's really useful to be in nature when you do that, having that fresh air.
Hmm.
And then I think we need to pay attention when we sleep. If we sleep in rooms that are, fully oxygenated, that especially in the winter, in certain colder climates, there might be a tendency to, protect yourself from cold and save on electricity or whatever people use for heating. But the problem is like we really need oxygen when we sleep. And the funny part is that some people use a tape, like paper tape, to tape their mouth for the night in order to force themselves to breathe through their nose. Because breathing through their nose oxygenates you much more because there's nitric oxide that is produced when you breathe through your nose, which allows your oxygen to enter the cells much easier. So it's distributing the oxygen, making it more available in the body.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned several things that we can do for having more oxygen available. So you were saying exercise every day, at least 12 minutes. You were saying go outside, being outside, or of course, both together, exercising outside. You were saying make sure that when you're inside, that you have enough oxygen, let's say by having ventilation or opening the window every now and then. And you were saying that nose breathing is better because you explained that there is nitric oxygen being generated, and that leads to the cells to absorb oxygen better.
Mhm.
Okay. So you mentioned several ways that we can have more oxygen. Do you think all of those ways can have all of those positive effects, the positive effects of having less anxiety, less depression, less procrastination, being physically more powerful, being mentally more powerful, having heightened sexual experiences, being able to deal with cold temperatures, having a better immune system? Do you think
Mhm.
that all of this positive effects can be achieved by any of those ways to get more oxygen intake?
No, not really. There are levels. So it depends where your baseline is. If you already breathe properly, for example, you won't see that much of a difference, right? But if you couldn't breathe through your nose because, I don't know, you had a cold and your nose was, blocked or something. So then if you unblock it and then you start breathing properly, you will see the difference. Or if you do the Wim Hof exercise, you are very likely to see the difference because it's just by the sheer amount of oxygen. So
Hmm.
there are special techniques for special purposes, and
Hmm.
then your baseline matters as well. So I would like you to also maybe share some of your experiences with how like oxygen helped you in your life.
Well, yeah, sure, I can do that. Um, so, at several points in my life, I think that the way that I was able to absorb information to study while being a student, I was having a lot of oxygen. So, for example, I when I was studying law, I was able to complete a 6-year law degree in only 1 year, and I
Wow.
was one of the best students. And so everybody asked me, so what did you do in order to accomplish this? Because nobody had ever accomplished this to do this in 1 year. And in fact, I had to get a special permission. And what I tell people is, look, what I didn't sit in the library with a book. I almost every day took a walk in the forest. I was living next to a forest, and I would go out in the forest and I would take a walk. And while I was walking, I would read the book. And I would be so focused that when I finished the book, I would know everything what was in the book, and I would have really understood it. So I basically continued doing that and reading all the books while I was walking in the forest, and then I took the exam and I got a really high grade. Similarly, people are asking me, how were you able to study 8 languages or 9 languages? And how were you able to almost speak fluent Chinese after 2 weeks, or to speak fluent French and be able to do everything in France just by having studied it by myself for 3 weeks? And I tell them the same thing. The only thing I did, I had some tapes, I had a book, and I went on walks in nature, or I took bike rides in nature with, while I had some audiobooks that I was listening to for studying French. And I would do this every single day. And that was so effective that I, in fact, was able to, to really be very productive learning. So I think that, and then I ask myself the question: so how was I able to do this? And I do attribute it to studying or working outside while doing physical activity. So being in nature and doing physical activity while my brain is working.
Fascinating, fascinating things. And there's, I think, another benefit when you move your body, when you walk, for example, you synchronize your body, you move the right and the left, and it creates certain rhythm, and maybe your heart rate gets synchronized with your breathing pattern, and then you enter this deeper flow, deeper like alpha state, right? And in that state, you have more access to mental capacities. That's fascinating. Yeah.
Did you have any similar experiences?
Yeah, I had a lot of insights during walks. Actually, there is this research from Stanford that claims that we are 60% more creative when we walk. So there is definitely something to be said about movement, and maybe the environment stimulates us a little bit just to basically occupy the prefrontal cortex a little bit so that the subconscious can kind of come through, because there's this balance. Like when we only use mostly like our prefrontal cortex, we're overly logical and just like focused on, I don't know, what we already know. But when we get it a little bit distracted with some activity, like some people drive and then they have the best ideas while driving, some people shower. So there needs to be like this low level activity that gets your brain just occupied enough not to overly focus on something, but then your intuition can speak. And I think nature is a perfect environment in terms of the vibe. Like we are designed to be in nature. Whereas if you go, on Las Ramblas in Barcelona, for example, and you have like 500 people per minute passing you, there's like no way that you would focus. So I find nature really good for focus as well. Less distraction, more predictable environment, good air, you're moving. So yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, I think it must be true. I mean, people were, when I was younger, when I was still a student, and when I was studying in university, I always did that. I remember I was studying in Ithaca, New York, and I was always taking walks in nature. And it was perfect because it's upstate New York. There's a lot of nature. So I was always taking walks, and I was studying for all my exams. And I was taking 4 times as many credit hours than the normal student. I was 4 times the workload. And I would just read a book while walking in nature. People that saw me, there were not that many people out there, but people that did see me was like, what is he doing there? Is he crazy? He's reading a book while he's walking here? But it was perfect because I was really able to have an optimal uptake of all the knowledge, and I would study a book for 1 week and then take the exam for and most likely get the top grade.
Wow. This is incredible. So this is basically like in the movie Limitless. It's the pill that you can take and, you get the best out of your brain. It's fascinating and it's free and everyone can try it easily. And maybe the people who live in the cities don't have much access to nature that we would need for that, because I think you need a special kind of nature. I really like to walk, for example, barefoot on the beach, on the
Mm-hmm.
sand.
Mm-hmm.
That's even better, I think, because you get stimulated a little bit from that. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah,
but working in the forest works as well. Totally.
yeah, I totally agree. And there was maybe 1 second. Hmm. Sorry, I have to cut this out. Um, so I was gonna say um, that I totally agree with that. What and that walking and being in nature. Oh yeah. Um, so I saw how effective and how productive I was while I was walking in nature, and then I was working on my computer a lot. Basically, everything I do nowadays is on the computer, and that's a problem because the computer. It's hard for me to take it into nature, and it's even more harder to walk while I'm working on my computer. So every time I have a book, I love reading books. I love taking my notes out. I print them out and then I'll take them out and I take walks. And I really feel extremely productive. But when I'm working on my computer, it's a little bit limited. And so I've been thinking about this. How, because it's really important to me, I can really see the difference. How is it possible that I can benefit from walking in nature when I'm working, while I'm working on a computer? Is there any way to do that? And so far, I haven't really found a way. I thought about looking for some kind of device or building some kind of device myself that I could just read everything that's on my computer and be able to type something on my computer while I'm taking a walk, while I'm outside. But I have to admit, it is difficult.
I have an idea. You could put treadmill in nature somewhere, and the treadmill would be spinning, and you would have your computer in one place, but you would be walking. There would be nature around you, and there would be laptop in a secure position all the time. Like people have standing desks, and then some people add the treadmill under the desk. And yeah, I watched some video about the office that changed normal desks to adjustable desks with the walking during the time of work, and they had some remarkable results in terms of lowering obesity and increasing productivity and all of that. We're not designed to sit around for 8 hours in front of the computer, so obviously.
Okay. All right. So then I wanted to see if there are some other things that we can do which would have a similar effect. So, walking in nature is great, both for doing exercise as well as for being in nature, being outside. What other things can we do to try to have more oxygenation? So you already mentioned breathing techniques. You mentioned exercise. You mentioned trying to get oxygen into our rooms in which we work, in which we sleep. You mentioned breathing through the nose.
Mm-hmm. And to the belly, down to the belly rather than shallow to the chest. And then I would also add iron. Like if you are anemic, like you might be breathing enough, but like the oxygen doesn't get distributed to your cells as well. So there's this, nitric oxide, another thing. So one thing is how much oxygen you're breathing in, but the other thing is like how much your body is using that oxygen and how well is distributing it to the cells. So we could work on that as well, just making sure you have enough iron.
Okay. I would say that as you say, the it's not about how much oxygen I take in. It's not how much oxygen I'm breathing in. It's about how much oxygen actually gets to the cells.
Mhm.
And the process from breathing to getting to the cells is actually a long process. So first of all, we have to breathe it in, and it has to go through our lungs. So if we're smoking, the lungs are cluttered, and the lungs have very, very small what's called capillaries, so that all the oxygen can be absorbed. But if those are clogged, it's more difficult for the oxygen to get into the bloodstream. Now, then the heart needs to work well, because if the heart doesn't work, then the blood is not circulating. And then in the arteries, it goes through all the arteries. And if the arteries are clogged, then the oxygen doesn't reach our our organs, our muscles, on our brain. And if the the oxygen gets transported by blood cells, red blood cells, and if we don't have enough red blood cells, then or have low iron, then the red blood cells cannot transport the sufficient oxygen. Or if the blood cells are all stuck together because our body acidity level is too high, they're all stuck together, then they don't float freely, then it's also not possible for the blood cells to transport all the oxygen. So there are many ways that we can try to increase the oxygen intake. Most of them having to do with good health.
Actually, you mentioned that very, very well, because obese people, for example, have something called sleep apnea. They cannot really sleep because the breath stops at some point. So what they use is oxygen masks. So the morbidly obese people would have like oxygen bottle, oxygen mask for sleeping, because their lungs are squashed by the fat. Like I saw a scan of how the body looks if you have like a lot of fat, and all the organs are just like minimized, and it's really hard to breathe through all this like fat. So another thing is to keep away from being obese, basically.
Okay, not being obese. Another, and of course, obesity, what does it do? Obesity is in the organs. It's around the organs, the fat. That's bad. Obesity is aesthetically, you get a belly. That's bad. But that's probably the best fat. There are much worse fat. And I guess one of the worst fats is the fat that's in your arteries, in your blood vessels. Because that means that the oxygen cannot be transported as well. The blood cannot circulate, and the oxygen cannot get to your organs. And it's very interesting to see, because the blood vessels are really small. So you see these large blood vessels here, and you would say, well, how much blood vessels can I have? Maybe 2 meters of blood vessels. But in fact, there are they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And if you line all of them up, you get a huge distance. Have a guess. If you line up a normal human being's blood vessels in one line, how long is that line? What would you say?
Yeah, like I remember that there was some talk about this, and it was insanely long, like I don't know, around the world or some crazy.
Exactly. Twice around the world.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane.
Imagine that. All your blood vessels, if you line them up in one line, since they're so small, it would go twice around the Earth. And so what you're protecting, if you're protecting your health, you have to protect a distance of that's twice as long as the Earth. You have to protect that distance from getting some blood clogs, so that the blood can flow through this distance all the time. Imagine that you have a pipeline going from Russia to Poland to Germany, and you have to protect it. That's a lot of work. Now we're talking about, just for one human being, we're talking about twice around the Earth, the distance you have to protect by not having your arteries and your blood vessels clogged up.
Yeah, so we have, like, we talked about obesity, smoking, definitely bad for that. And then the bad habits of breathing through your mouth, and maybe taking shallow breaths. Not exercising would count, not ventilating the rooms where you're in. It's sometimes challenging because people in certain climates, when, let's say, I don't know, in Texas or somewhere, where you need to be with air conditioning all the time because it's so hot, right? So they're at home and they're at work, but it's kind of the same air recirculating many times, not the best quality. So a climate, whether you live close to the forest where you can walk and then read a book, that matters, and what kind of climate you are in, that matters as well. So maybe even it would be smart to strategically place yourself in the climate that will help you to have the good life in that regard.
Yeah, I guess you also don't want to be in a city with a lot of air pollution, because I would imagine that air pollution does not help your oxygenation or the oxygen at least getting to your vital organs, into the cells.
True.
Also because there, with pollution, for example, you've what's called CO, carbon, what's called carbon monoxide, and that's much. So it's competing with oxygen, and it gets into the cells much easier. So when we get that, then oxygen cannot get into the cells because carbon monoxide is getting to the cells.
Yes.
So that's why the cells don't get any oxygen anymore. So there are, the effect of pollution is important as well. So so if you summarize, we got a lot of things, a lot of benefits of having well oxygenation of the cells, both in the brain as well as in the organs and the muscles. And we got a lot of ways that we can increase the oxygenation. So let's summarize. What are the ways to get more oxygenation? What are the benefits? Maybe I talk about the ways and you talk about the benefits.
Okay.
So let me start with the ways to get more oxygenation. So you mentioned this technique of Wim Hof to have, before doing physical exercise, to try out to do this deep breathing and not exhale too much and do quick breathing, and that increases the oxygen level in the body, and that you will see that you will be able to do more push-ups. Being in the outside, there is just better air quality, and with more oxygen. And then, of course, not being in a polluted city, because then the outside air quality would be maybe worse than in the room. If you are in a room, then make sure that your room does get ventilation, and that the air is good, especially when you're sleeping, because you do also need good oxygen while you sleep. Then the blood flow. It's not only about the oxygen that's getting in, it's also about how the oxygen can be used by the cells. So make sure that there's a good blood flow. So having a good heart. How do you get a good heart? For example, exercise. Exercise helps you also to have the blood circulating in your body. Then make sure that the blood cells have enough iron to have the hemoglobin to be able to, for the oxygen to stick to the red blood cells, and make sure that the red blood cells don't are not stuck together, but flow freely, by making sure that your body doesn't have too much acidity.
Mm-hmm.
By, for example, not eating too many acid foods. And then, of course, in nutrition also for obesity, make sure you're not obese, because if you're obese, then, for example, there will be too much fat around your lungs, which might cause sleep apnea, as you said, and of course is also gonna make the fat inside your arteries, inside your blood vessels more, which means blood is less able to flow freely, and then try to breathe through your nose for better oxygenation. So those were all the things, quite a lot of things that we mentioned to be able to have more oxygenation of your body. Now to the question, what are the benefits?
Okay. So normally I want to start from this, that if you have, let's say, nutritional supplements, they claim that they help to have like the normal, correct functioning of the body. And I was always thinking about it like, oh, that's so uninspiring as a goal. Like, you will be normal. Like, why would anyone want that, right? But in terms of oxygen, if you have like actually proper amount, you will be happy, productive, energetic, creative, all of that. You will be just like on high and feeling amazing in your life and in your body, kind of regardless of the circumstances. So it's very interesting to, if you control something like on the cell level, like how much oxygen your cell is getting, it's so much more important than, for example, how much money you have on your bank account, because you can feel differently about the same amount, but like depending on how you feel inside, right? So, for example, you might be feeling really down, then you have a coffee, and then you feel amazing. So nothing changed in your outside, but your chemistry of the brain has changed. So this is one of those things that you can give yourself and immediately from inside out feel amazing. And then you can access certain states of consciousness that are not easily available otherwise. As we mentioned, some sexual techniques. So you might feel more from the same touch, for example, can feel so much more if other senses are blurred and they're switched off almost, and you have your focus, full focus right here and right now because you hyperoxygenated, for example. And then you can go in the cold and resist it without much problem. You can control your immune system. Wim Hof actually taught volunteers how to do that, and then volunteers got injected with the disease, and they had also suppressed the disease with their breathing, their mind. So it's fascinating. And then in different traditions, like in yogi traditions, breath was used for a variety of things. Definitely the easiest one is to calm you down, to get you out of fight or flight, and put you in the optimal functioning of the body. Healing, even healing of the body, right? Because when you get the stress down, the cortisol goes down, your body has time and option to heal itself.